So, good evening. I am Soumya, and today we are going to continue our journey of understanding Bhagavad Gita from Acharya Prashant's book from volume 1, and now we will continue on verses 1.44 to 1.47, the bondage of superstition and casteism. You can listen to the previous verses in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita playlist by Acharya Prashant on my channel. So let's start. We have heard, O Janardana, that dwelling in hell is inevitable for those men in whose families religious practices have been destroyed. Chapter 1, verse 44. Alas, we are involved in a great sin, in that we are prepared to slay our kinsmen out of greed for the pleasure for a kingdom. Chapter 1, verse 45. Verify if the sons of Dhritarashtra, weapons in hand, were to slay me unresting and unarmed. Unresting and armed in the battle. What would be better for me? Sanjay said, speaking thus in the midst of battlefield, Arjuna casting away his bow and arrows sank down on the seat of his chariot with his mind distressed with sorrow. Chapter 1, verse 47. So, let's read what Acharya Prashant has to say about the above verses. Acharya Prashant. So, chapter 1 is setting the problem statement. The problem that Shri Krishna proceeds to address and solve in the 17 chapters, right? So, we have looked at the state of Duryodhana. We have addressed his predicament in detail. And then, with great interest, we have tried to figure out Arjuna's mental condition. Where is Arjuna coming from? What are the prejudices he is holding? See, please understand any story worth listening to and any scripture worth reading. Ultimately, has to be about liberation of the ego from its own ignorance. There is no other spiritual subject or time. There is no other spirituality. This is the very basic and very strict definition of spirituality to address the ego's need to be free from itself, the liberation of the ego from its self created world of ignorance. The self created world has relationships, ideas, thoughts, memories, desires, principles, so much else. If ever you come across a story or a book of sutras, a book of concepts or principles, this is the one touchstone. This is what you should ask yourself. Are the three present here? If the three are present in that story or something, then that story has a spiritual purpose. Otherwise, that story is just an entertainment, bogus. Which three are we talking of? The ego, the earth, and Prakriti. These three have to be necessarily present in the story in some form or the other, in the name of sub character or the other. If you do not find these present, and if you do not find the story useful in terms of guiding the ego towards the truth, then we said the story is just a spiritual entertainment. So Arjuna's ego, its predicament, and its university are at display in chapter 1, right? And usually chapter 1 is ignored because Krishna does not speak in this one. Arjuna just keeps expressing his situation. And that is exactly the reason why chapter 1 is so extremely important. Because we get to know what all is not right. The ensuing 17 chapters are a very compassionate attempt to set right what is not right. And our first relationship as we are is with what is not right. Simply put, we are closer to Arjuna than we are to Krishna. Are we not? Is our situation similar or rather identical to that of Arjuna or with that of Krishna? Arjuna. So we have to say the various facets of Arjuna's personality here. We have to look at the nuances of his argument. We have to see that all he does to resist Krishna, and only when he will understand why Krishna addresses him and teaches him the way he does in the next chapters. So, here is the argument that Arjuna comes up with. We will also take a look at what all he has already said. But let's begin with this one first. We have heard Krishna that departure to hell and dwelling in hell become unavoidable for those in whose families in the religious traditions are not followed. And which religious traditions is he talking of? Because of you do not understand what Arjuna is supporting. You will not understand what Krishna is destroying. Which religious tradition is he talking of? Arjuna is talking of everything from misogyny to casteism to superstition. That's what Arjuna is supporting. And it will come as a surprise to most of us that the lecture of Gita is actually principally addressed to take care of these things. Atmajana. Atmajanana is the medium, self knowledge is the way these problems have been tackled. Self knowledge is the tool, the weapon used to slay these enemies. What are the enemies? We have to be very careful in looking at Arjuna's attitude. For that's where you come to see what the enemies are. First of all, the enemies lie in the body. So Arjuna is talking of moha, and it is inferable that Arjuna is also experiencing bhaya. So attachment and fear. Attachment and fear represent the physical tendencies that Sri Krishna is fighting through the Gita, through this treatise on self-knowledge. At the physical level, Sri Krishna is fighting physical tendencies, and then after that, there is a lot at the mental level that Sri Krishna is fighting against. What is at the mental level that Sri Krishna is fighting against? Arjuna says, you see, if I fight, all the Kshatriya men will be gone. And if the Kshatriya men are gone, their women will become corrupted. Now, this is not a very dignified way of looking at women, or it is. Their women as if men own women, and as if women have no discretion, no life of their own. This is a very objectified way where women are things to be possessed. Things to be possessed, if left unpossessed, would tumble into some kind of moral abyss. And this, you see, has also to an extent rather largely been the conservative and orthodox attitude towards women, that women should always be owned and possessed and never allowed any freedom. And that is not just something of a social customs. All this exists squarely in written, in documents that we have somehow very surprisingly honored over the centuries. Should not be educated. Women should not move out of the house. Women should not even have a teacher. The husband should be the only teacher, and that the women should have. And if any man attempts to teach a married woman, that man should be declared a fraudster, because the only guru for a married woman can be her husband. The only religious practice that the married woman is supposed to follow is serving her husband. So what is dharma for her? Pati Parayanatha, devotion of the master. You take care of your husband, and this is your dharma. You don't need to read. You don't need to do anything. What is Agnihotra for you? Household duties. Do you understand Agnihotra? What is Agnihotra? Yajna, sacrifice, the power of Havana, oblation with fire. So you don't even need to participate in that. If you are washing utensils and taking care of the babies, that is your Agnihotra. So all that has been there. Arjuna is speaking from there. So do you see who is that Arjuna is representing? Arjuna is representative of all that which is regressive in cultural thought. And now do you see who the Krishna of Gita is? He is a liberating force. Arjuna stands for conservatism and orthodoxy. And Sri Krishna comes as a force that liberates the mind from all that. That's why chapter 1 is so important. It clearly tells us where Arjuna is standing, and therefore it tells us why the Gita had to be spoken at all. The Gita was not for the purpose of Atmajanna. I am saying Atmajanna or self knowledge has been used as a medium to address the very regressive mental attitudes that Arjuna is carrying, and obviously the very human physical problem of attachment and fear. So if all the men get killed, the women will get bonkers, and the women will go and reproduce with all the so-called lower caste men. It's shocking. Not that Arjuna is saying all these things, but that how nothing has changed at all. It's as if Arjuna is one amongst us. It's as if the time means nothing. You say Vedanta, say time is an illusion. Now you say why. You could have an Arjuna even today, right here in the middle of us, and he would probably say all these same things that we find said here. Our women will get corrupted. This kind of disgust towards so-called lower castes that you do want to see Kshatriya women going to them even after your death. You are saying, as long as I was alive, I had a particular attitude towards you, and I want to ensure that even after I die, you do not get to touch my women. Do you see? And do you also see how, wherever there would be ignorance, you would have these attitudes towards dominating the mind? So, at the time, at that moment, rather, Arjuna has a certain ignorance, and at that time, and that leads to the display of these attitudes. The same thing happens today as well. Wherever there is ignorance, there could be these problems, and these problems, in that same sense, eternal. Men will continue to look down upon women in some form or the other, and men and women will continue to be each other's enemy. Men will exploit women in one way, women will react in a passive way, and they will want to avenge for themselves. So, all this will continue. One section of the society will continue to be averse towards another section. There would be divisions galore in the name of caste or race or ethnicity, religion, obviously, language. People will find some excuse to be divided. Lack of self knowledge, and Arjuna has these attitudes. Lack of self knowledge today has these same attitudes. Wherever we very well know that there are indeed was historically a battle fought by the name of Mahabharata. This is not mere fiction. It actually did happen. It is a historical event, and that battle was fought no less than at least 3000 years back. At least 3000 years back. So, what has changed over these 3000 years? What has changed? Men will be men. 3000 years is nothing. Look at him. He is not worried I will die. He is saying, if I die, my women will rush to that lower caste man. I cannot allow that to happen. So I will not fight at all. I will not fight at all because I will die. My women will run away. So I am prepared to give up on property, prestige, dharma, everything, but I cannot allow my women to run away. And it's okay if she were running away to a Kshatriya, but if I die, that would mean all the Kshatriyas will also die. So she will run away to some. No, no, no. This cannot be allowed. This is the argument. And then the argument is extended. You see, if she will go to some lower caste men, she will get pregnant. How confident is he of the If I die, my woman goes there. If she goes there, she gets pregnant. This is well said. Nothing to just laugh over. I mean, these attitudes exist, and they don't just exist on the margins. They are the mainstream attitudes, and that's the reason why Gita is needed even today. And then, even what will happen? This rascal, Varnasankara, will be born, belonging to no caste at all, because such things, again in our culture, have been called as pratiloma, not to be allowed. A lower caste women can be taken away by a higher caste man, and that is okay. Even the son that is born or daughter that is born will be accepted within the Varna structure. But if a higher caste woman mates with a lower caste man, some offspring is born, then that fellow is not given any place in the society. Varna Sankra, you belong to no place. So, first of all, this kind of tragedy, Varna Sankara incidentally illuminates. The entire field of genetic studies have very clearly proven that when genes from two diverse genetic locations meet, then the offspring is both healthier, more intelligent, and more creative. So, for humanity to progress, it is important that people from different places, different races, different ethnicities, they meet and they converge. That's even a biological imperative. So, for example, an American meeting a Chinese is more likely to produce a creative offspring than an American meeting with her neighbor. To some extent, there is also the reason why what we call as the Sanatan Dharma did not extend beyond its geographical boundaries because you had set such strict conditions. You can marry only within. If you marry someone else, then Dharma is lost. So, how can you go to any place now? How can you go to China? How can you go to Arabia? How can you go to Australia? After all, the land route was possible available from Persia to Middle East, and from there to the Levant, and then to the European landmass, or from Kashmir to Central Asia, and from there to Europe. Indians could have historically spread out, but that never happened. Have you never wondered have you not wondered why all Hindus are concentrated only to one country called India? Why the spread never happened? And this you do not find in the case of any other major religion. Think of Christianity, think of Islam, think of even Buddhism. Look at how they spread out. But when you have attitudes like this, then spreading out becomes next to impossible. But so how this one Sankara fellow is there? And what is the problem if Varna Sankara is born? All the diseased dead souls will go hungry and thirsty because they will not like to accept food from this kind of a descendant. They will say, we are Kshatriya souls and we cannot have Shraddha and Tarpana coming to us from this kind of a mixed breed. So we are not taking this. And if that is not accepted, then great misfortune will fall on the entire kingdom. The argument just goes on and on and on. And just think of Krishna at this moment. He is saying, what is this? Where is all this coming from? No wonder why he then had to purify Arjuna's mind with a solid dose of Vedanta. We have heard, O Krishna, that dwelling in hell is imperative for those in whose family these so called religious practices are not followed. And which religious practices is he talking of? All these things, offering the pind, the rice ball, to all those things, and we have heard of that. So, the next thing you also discover here are belief in heaven and hell after death. Now you know what the Gita is addressing, right? The Gita exists to destroy all such beliefs. No heaven, no hell. Vedanta does not admit any heaven, any hell. Vedanta also does not admit that you can have salvation by following practices. Rituals, etc., have very little place in Vedanta. And even if you are to allow follow rituals, you must be very clearly know the symbolical meaning of those rituals. Blindly following rituals is something that Vedanta never expects. And mind you, Gita is a very important pillar of Vedanta. And Arjuna here is talking of blind rituals. He is taken talking of heaven and hell, and he is also using the word. It's an important word, anu su su sruma. I do not really know, but I have heard that gives you insight into how people follow the cultural dogmas. They do not know. They have just heard, and Arjuna is being a bit tactless here. He clearly simply admits, if I have heard that all this will happen to though I have just heard, yet I very sternly believe in it. If you have just heard something, how is your belief in it so strong? If you have just heard of something, why have you not inquired? Why have you not asked for the sources? And this is now a moment for all of us to ask ourselves a lot of that which we will call as our religion or culture. How much of it do you know of them, the primary sources, and how much of it has come to you just from the hearsay? Do you understand hearsay? What? When somebody tells you ऐसा करना होता है, you have to do like this, do you bother to ask where it is written? I am asking you. Most of us here are either married or would be marrying. When you were doing the circles around the fire and reciting the vows and the oaths. Even at that moment, did you bother to ask where are these slokas, their mantras, these vows coming from? And that, I suppose, is an important moment in life. It is not, is it not? You are getting married. Do you bother to ask these mantras that we are partaking in? The Pandit is saying a lot of things. Then the groom and the bride too have to follow what the priest is saying, and they too have to recite a few verses. Did you bother to ask for the meaning? That's how culture progresses, not really progressive. I would say keep rolling on through the centuries. Nobody bothers to ask are doing why we are doing what we are doing. Nobody bothers to ask where is it coming from. Is it even written anywhere? Most of us that which we follow, not only in India actually, that is a worldwide disease. Everyone it is much the same thing. Most of that which we follow is actually never coming from any primary source. It is just a custom. Nobody knows how it started from, where it came, and usually it has nothing to do with religion. It is just that a custom, and it is needed a very sad situation. It is indeed a very sad situation when customs become religion. Somebody asks you, what is your religion? And you start talking of customs, traditions. Please see that the entire Bhagavad Gita is committed to destroy all those things. This is something that you would probably not have heard of before. Probably nobody ever told you the purpose of Bhagavad Gita. Probably no one ever told you why Krishna had to speak so much. And that's why I keep saying, please look at chapter 1. Then you will realize that Gita is a rebellion. Then the Gita is militating against something. That the Gita is not just contextless discourse of Janana. There is a very clear contextual emergency, and this is the context Arjuna's blind belief and naive commitment to superstition, culture, tradition. That is what the Gita is stands to destroy. Now, that is something that Orthodox people hate to hear because to them, even Krishna is a cultural symbol. They do not know the Gita. They just worship the stories around Krishna, right? So it will be very unpleasant to hear the purpose of Gita as it is evident from the verses themselves is that you should not blindly believe in anything. that you must know who are you are. You must know life before you talk of all these superstitions and heaven and hell and various other kinds of nonsense. Now, do you see how dangerous the real meaning of Gita is? Now, do you see why it becomes extremely important for many people that the meaning of Gita is distorted? Because if the real meaning of Gita comes out, then a lot that is respected, a lot that is continuing in the name of religion, all that will fall and collapse. Do you understand this? Please, so if all that has to be saved, then the Gita has to be compulsively misinterpreted. If you do not misinterpret Gita, then the Gita is a bomb. It will not allow your life to stay the way it is. Remember, I don't own Gita. The Gita belongs to all of us. We are deeply respect the Gita. The Gita means a lot to every human being and especially a Hindu, correct? The Gita is a universal document. So if I am trying to bring out the very obvious truth that the verses have, then this is not something personal. If the truth of Gita comes out, it is your truth because Gita belongs to you. This that I am talking of, that I am emphasizing on, cannot be a part of some personal agenda, or can it be? This is your document. This is your book. Who am I? I am nobody. But it is not important that you know the real meaning of your own holy book. Please answer. So that's why looking at the verses with great attention is very important. Potentially, what we have learned in the forms of spiritual legacy, the Upanishads, this Gita, several other Gitas, several other scriptures as well, all that is unimaginably high and sublime and wonderful. And we are blessed that all this was given to us and all this is still available to us. It's a blessing, and that's why it is all the more unfortunate and tragic then when this is unavailable. Still, we are following a thousand kinds of nonsense. Think of it. How mindless is it? Is it not? The highest has been bequeathed to us. We didn't even earn it. It has been given to us for free, like a loving gift from a doting grandfather. You grew up and you discovered you had a mansion for yourself. So that's what the Gita is, a loving gift. This is how tremendously lucky we are, and yet how unlucky we are that instead of knowing the real works, the real philosophy, the crux of all religiosity, we instead continue to call all kinds of mindful thoughts, attitudes, customs, traditions as religion. And if somebody asks you, where is that coming from? You do not know. Even you have just this one word to say. Anu Su Sruma. I have heard. I have heard. Are we illiterate? Can't we read? Why have we just heard? How many senses are there in the body? Just one. Just one. Janadriya, organ of perception. Is there? How about this? Points towards the eye. And how about this Indriya called the mind? Why don't you read? Why don't you apply the mind to see what your religion really is about? And it's a great religion instead. It has sunk into such disrepair and disregard that it becomes rather sickening to look at it. Another word that Arjuna is using, it's important. He does not say, this is when I have heard. The next one, he says Vyam, we. Those who know even elementary Sanskrit know what Vyam means. What is Vyam? So, he is saying, it's not that only I am deluded. At this moment, there are only the two of them, right? Arjuna and Krishna. So, if Arjuna says Vyam, who is he including in his circle of ignorance? Krishna. That is the way of the ego. He says, "You see, Krishna, we are about to commit a great sin." Arjuna is telling, "We are about to commit a great sin." And what is the great sin? The great sin is when I follow your advice. De facto, Arjuna is prepared to declare even Krishna a sinner. And that's what ignorance does. When the Gita is brought to you, then you declare a sinner, the one who brings the Gita to you. Even Arjuna is doing that. Why will others not do that? That is how repulsive the ego is towards the Gita. Whenever Gita will be brought, the one bringing the Gita will have to face all these things. Mind you, this is not Duryodhana terming Krishna a sinner. This is Arjuna of all people. Arjuna, why? Because truth hurts the ego. And when the ego is hurt, it becomes disrespectful towards everything, including the truth. It says truth or no truth. I don't bother. I just don't like being hurt. You have hurt me. Now I will not bother for your reputation or your place or whatever. If you take care of me, I will offer my salvations, solutions, salutations. Don't touch me. Don't hurt me. Let me be as I am, and I will keep respecting you. Oh Krishna, you are great. But the time Krishna will actually become active on you, the moment Krishna will actually try to transform you, you will become inimical even towards Krishna, and this is displayed not only in the first chapter. Again and again, Arjuna says in the second, third, fourth chapters, and even later on, Krishna, why are you deluding me? This is a very disrespectful indictment, is it not? When you say you are deluding me, you are de facto leveling the charge of fraud against that person, and that to a bloody fraud, because you are pushing me towards slaying my own kith and kin. So, just blindly offering respect to the Gita without knowing the Gita is of no help. You have to understand the nuances of the story within. You have to understand what really is going on. And the Gita opens up, assumes a life for you, and starts helping you. Oh, it's a great sin we are getting involved in, that we want to stay even on Krishna, kinsmen, slay even our kinsmen, our relatives, just because we are greedy of pleasure and kingdom. Look at the pretty direct insinuation. It's not just that I am greedy, in fact, I am not greedy because I am refusing to fight. Who is greedy then? You are greedy, greedy for pleasures and greedy for the kingdom. And you can only imagine how Krishna must be feeling and smiling because he knows the way of ego. If you knows the way of ego, nothing surprises you. When you know the way of the ego, then you very well know that even your best friend and your most loved one can come to stab you. If their self interest, if their ego is hurt, does not matter what your relationship with the other one is. Here, these two are supposed to be best friends, right? Krishna and Arjuna. Also, Krishna is Arjuna's guide and mentor, guru, actually. And I still see that Arjuna is saying he is leveling solid accusations, though in a polite way still till now, irrespective of whether it is expressed politely. The fact is that these are not things that you should want to say to a Krishna. And then, the truth. Truly, the truth here is what you have brought me is not the truth. The truth is that even if all these Kauravas, Dhritarashtra's sons, were to kill me, it would be better for me to simply die unarmed and unresisting. Rather than fighting them, killing them, it's better for me to get killed. Now this sounds pretty honorable, right? And people have credited Arjuna with a lot of ahimsa. They have said, look at Arjuna, he is saying, I will rather get killed than kill. And that comes from verse 46 and from a few other verses also, where he has said, these are exactly the people for whom you want to win kingdoms and bounties. These are the people for whom you want to win wars. Now, what's the point in winning wars if they are to be killed? So that's something that he has previously said. And here he is saying that I am such an apostle of non-violence, the very epitome of ahimsa, that I will not pick up my weapons even if they come and kill me. And this gladdens the heart of those who care parroting the principle of ahimsa without knowing what real ahimsa is. If one understands the Gita, one would say the sentiment expresses by Arjuna in verse 46 is pure ahimsa, pure violence. Whether the war that Arjuna is encouraged to fight, the war that Krishna wants Arjuna to fight, is actually ahimsa. It's just that appearances are deceptive. Sometimes, when someone says, I will not fight, that is deep violence. And sometimes, when somebody is fighting and shedding blood, his own and others, that is deep non violence. Sometimes it is possible. So, what Krishna is preaching here is actually non violence. Arjuna, in his decision not to fight, is actually being quite violent. We will come to that. We will try to understand that when we discuss the meaning of hinsa, what does it mean? These days, a lot of people have suddenly started liking the Gita because they feel that Gita licenses them to fight and kill. So suddenly, from nowhere, they have developed regards for the Gita. Just as we have had one Hitler's generals, or probably his propaganda minister. Who was it? Goebbels or Himmler? Somebody he just loved the Gita. He said Gita is wonderful. It is a certificate towards cold-blooded bloodshed. Just kill. So, in the same way, today a lot of people have started talking of Gita, thinking that the Gita sanctions violence. Well, it does not. What Krishna is preaching is pure non-violence. Any action towards the Gita, anything that takes you towards the truth is ahimsa. But for you to take that action, first of all, you must know where your falseness are, because the truth is intangible, ineffable. Moving towards the truth can happen only in one way, by shedding your own falseness. So, this war is about disregarding his physical impulses of attachment, fear, his social conditioning related to traditions, customs, superstition, and this war is also about keeping the greater public good in mind. This war is not being fought so that the Pandavas gain the throne. This war is being fought so that the population of Hastinapur and by extension the population of this entire country get an able ruler. If someone like Duryodhana, who has largely been on the side of deceit and ruthless pursuit of self interest, becomes the king, then the quality of consciousness of the entire population goes down. So the war is being fought for the greater public good. There are the reasons why Krishna wants Arjuna to fight the war. Do not stop just because of your Do not stop just because of your social conditioning. Keep in mind the larger public good. Keep in mind that the objective is beyond personal. So this is not violence really. Taking care of somebody else's interest, how can that be violence? If you are thinking of the welfare of the population of an entire nation, how exactly is that violence? And it's not that as if Krishna wanted bloodshed. He has tried his best to avoid war. But if war becomes unavoidable, does that mean that the nation should be left to somebody like Duryodhana? It would have been even better than fighting a war if somehow a peaceful solution could be arrived at, but the peaceful solution never came. In that situation, one cannot let millions of people go to the dogs. So, the first chapter is very important because it proves things in perspective. You realize what is at stake. You realize what is that Krishna has to fight against. You realize the enormity of the challenge that Sri Krishna is facing, and then you become more receptive towards the forthcoming chapters. And then finally, the last verse. Arjuna casts away his weapon, his bows, his arrows, and just collapses. He sinks down on the seat of his chariot, his mind burdened with sorrow. Arjuna has declared his intention, I will not fight, and the declaration comes in a very visible shape. The weapons have been kept aside that Arjuna himself just sits down. Rather, that's how chapter 1 concludes. So, in the flow, we have read not only verses till 1.44 to 1.45, we have completed verses till 1.47. If you like my effort, please like my video to show your appreciation towards me and comment your feedback to give me better advice, and please subscribe my channel to continue on this journey of understanding Gita. Thanks a lot.